Hi, welcome to a new game review. So this will be quite a relatively short game. It seems white got a very big advantage from the opening. Black could have fought on, but somehow he didn't find the best continuation, which perhaps wasn't very intuitive, though it is quite instructive. So we will take a look at it. So it started as some reti. Here the typical moves are most challenging is considered d4 to get some benodi, but other moves are c6, you get some slav, e6 for a queen's gambit declined, you can take the pawn to play a queen's gambit accepted. Knight c6 in general isn't really possible because now white got the two pawns against one, and also the queen has been developed too early. So white already has a big advantage after knight c3, queen a5. Now white can of course take the center. He chooses to do so with e4, which does make sense of course, but more accurate is d4, as mentioned in the comment. It does stop e5, and also it threatens d5 quite quickly, for example right here. After e4, e5, now there's a small hole on d4, which if given the chance black can potentially exploit, but again if given the chance. So white plays actively with bishop e5, bishop goes to d6 to defend e5, d4 is played, very good, very active. Now bishop d7. It seems the only way to fight on was bishop g4 to indirectly defend the pawn on e5, instead of defending passively by getting rid of the pin. But now d5, a nice move. The black knight goes to e7, though probably a bit better is b8 to not lose castling. And after, for example, bishop e2, which would be the most accurate, not to develop the opponent's pieces. Now black is severely underdeveloped, his queen is on an awkward place, it might even get trapped soon. White has more space and is generally a lot better, but of course the fight can go on. Black can fire on with moves like b5. Instead knight goes to e7, now white gets a big advantage by leaving black's king in the center, and he doesn't really have to prove anything here, he can castle. Black decides to play rook d8. The rook in general doesn't do much, black should probably invest in development. He is planning to kind of castle queenside, but I think it should be clear that it's not a very good place for the king. If the king wants to castle, maybe he should kind of castle kingside like this, by moving the other rook to d8. It seems a bit safer there. King safety, as we will see, will become an issue. Knight f6. Now knight d2, a very good move, improving this knight, which isn't really doing much, and on c4 it will be amazing and very strong. Knight d2, h5. Now again this move doesn't really do much, it kind of hints at some counterplay on the king side, but it is a bit slow. But of course it is kind of hard to suggest anything good for black at this point. Okay, h5. Knight went to b3, though I think it's not very intuitive to block the b pawn. Eventually white will have to, or at least should, try to use his pawns to complete the attack on the queen side. Here he has a couple of targets, they're both the king and the queen as well, and this is natural enough. For example, queen a6. Now we can defend the knight. The knight is sort of pinned, but there's no way to exploit this. Next we can try a3 before b5 would already trap the queen. Black seems in big trouble. Even f4 is an issue in some positions. But knight b3 happened, queen a6, and f3. This move kind of protects from knight g4, though it seems now black might get some time to shelter his king, and again he should play the not very intuitive king e8. Suddenly he doesn't really have to castle, as this rook is at least acting like it's active on the h-file, while on the queen side there is no safety for the king, as we will see. Instead of f3, probably white should have developed something and ignored this threat, for example rook to c1, and if knight g4, white can get away with tempo, he can give this a double attack, move the bishop to c5, and now this knight is hanging in the air. We can play h3, f3 at any point, and white again is just going to attack this queen and maybe even trap it. c7 is a big weakness, some tactics are looming, and white should be basically winning. But f3 is fine. King goes to c8 instead, queen c2, then knight d7, and this was an interesting moment. The only way for black to basically fight on is to open up his king with c6, which is of course again not very intuitive, but there's a couple of things to understand here. c6 of course weakens the king, but it's only in the short term. What I mean by that is that the king doesn't have to stay on c8. Ideally it would of course like to go to a8. In that case, the c-file will not necessarily be a bad thing for black, especially if he improves his rook with rook c8. Also, we have to understand this pawn on d5 is very annoying for black. He cannot move anything, talking about his knights. So c6 positionally is very desirable. Of course, yes, the king is in a very uncomfortable position, but there's no immediate way for white to exploit this. Even after a4, black can even coldly take here, which is very non-human, but this is kind of possible. The point is after knight b5, now we can even block with the knight, but even we can go here. Even losing this pawn is not the end of the world, as now black has at least gained some counterplay in the center, some immediate counterplay. At that, e4 is hanging, and white doesn't really have a way to win yet. Though of course it should be clear white is on the big advantage side, but the game is not very clear, as there are some kind of threats and the center is opening up. So here black had to understand that the statics are not on his side. If he does nothing, he will have to lose slowly, which basically happened in the game. And again with c6, I'm not saying this is easy, but we have to understand that this king is a moving target. It's not a static target. The king will want to go to a8 anyway, so the c-file is only temporarily dangerous. And importantly, white has no way to immediately exploit this. After knight e7, this move is too passive. Now there's no pressure on d5 basically. Black has no counterplay. White can just improve his position like this. Maybe more accurate was here to instantly make a big threat of knight b5, forking the bishop, and also a7, also not giving the queen too many squares, but this is fine. Now c6 was played, a bit late but also possible, and white took on c6, which is maybe not the most accurate. a4 again is what the engine suggests. The threat is knight b5, and white should eventually break through. For example, even like this, if black takes, after ab, white will take on a7, and along with the rook and the open c-file, there will be no surviving. But here, after knight e5, king b8, suddenly black is somehow in the game. As we see, the point was not exactly the c-file, and now that the king has moved, the c-file is basically useless for white, at least for the moment, though he does find a way to exploit it. After a3, black goes to knight f6, and probably he has missed the very good move that white has played, which is a move back with the knight b4, which forces the a-file open, and this just means black will be resigning quite soon. Instead, black should have actually went here to block this bishop, and now for example after knight b4, black can take with the bishop, as usually in defense knights are better, and after this move the queen, and there is no checkmate for white. There is no strong attack. He is forced to trade queens, and the game goes on. But here this is quite intuitive, but sadly knight b4. Black took on b4, which aggravates the situation. After this, the position is basically hopeless. White can even take here with a nice combination going like this: queen c7, take here, and rook e1, which will end in checkmate, specifically Even here, of course, other moves win as well, but this is checkmate. So this was already possible, but knight a5 is also fine. This forces open more stuff. Black went here, but there's not much else to do. If here, then white can at least take here, forking these two, and the game will be over. Instead, knight d4, white gives a check, takes a knight. It seems simple enough to get rid of this counterplay. Knight c6 was somehow winning, but it makes more sense to get rid of some defenders. Next, knight c6, a very good move again, based on the variation that after this is checkmate, and after queen takes we can win the queen. So a6, now white just takes a rook, and now he is materially up and he is also mating the opponent, and eventually he took the rook, which is maybe a bit sloppy, maybe a bit more simple is to end the game with checkmate, but this is fine enough. White has a lot of material and the rest of the game is not very interesting. White didn't blunder anything and the game ended in short order. So pretty interesting game, quite well played by white, not many mistakes to learn upon, but we can see that black started with breaking a few opening principles by not playing for the center and moving the queen around many times. White played quite well, developed his pieces, maybe could have played more energetically, but it was good enough. And black eventually found the idea of c6, which almost equalized, and it did give him a decent game, though he slipped away again. And this knight b4 move opened things up very nicely, and white won the game.